Hello YouTube. In this video we will be looking at an issue that comes up every 4 years, the Electoral College. The Electoral College is how the US elects its president. Currently, a successful candidate needs a minimum of 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. This process of electing presidents has come under great scrutiny, and many have called for it to be abolished or somehow reformed. Before I give my opinion about the Electoral College and what should happen, we must understand what it is and why it came to be. As G.K. Chesterton said, don't remove a fence until you know why it was put up in the first place. So first we will investigate why the fence was put up to begin with. The Electoral College was created by the U.S. Constitution in Article 2. Each state gets a number of electors that is equal to the number of representatives that state has in the House plus 2 senators that each state receives. The District of Columbia now receives 3 Electoral College votes, the same as the smallest possible amount a state can receive. The Constitution gives the state legislatures the responsibility to decide how the electors are awarded to candidates. Currently, 48 states plus DC awards all of their electors to the candidate who wins a plurality of the votes on election day in that state. Maine and Nebraska award electors based on who wins the congressional districts, and the winner of the statewide vote gets the 2 electors representing the senator seats. The first question to ask is, why was the Electoral College created to begin with? When writing the Constitution, the U.S. had very little to go off of when it came to examples. Most of Europe was still in some form of monarchy, and the few republics that existed were not what we would consider democratic by modern standards. The Founding Fathers were trying to balance what they saw as Republican values with the safety of the nation in mind. This resulted in many strange and sometimes downright hypocritical elements being put into the Constitution, but for now we will only look at the Electoral College. The founders were fearful of corruption in every form. They did not want one executive to be given too much power and become a king. They did not want the legislature to dominate the other branches of government. There were always threats of foreign interference and influence over the president. Lastly, the founders feared the rule of the mob. All of these fears and more came together to bring about the Electoral College. Firstly, there were very few people that actually got to vote in the early republic. Only land-owning males received the right to vote. So in other words, only some white dudes could vote in the early US. In the beginning, the state legislatures held far more power than they do today. That is why the state legislatures were given the power to decide how electors would be selected. Over time, almost all have chosen the popular vote of the state to select the winner of all electors. Founders were concerned about the balance of power between the states. States were much more important in the early republic, and up until the Constitution, they often acted as independent republics in a union of nations rather than a united republic. There were many fears that larger states, like New York and Virginia, would dominate the smaller states in the Union. This led to strange dynamics of representatives and all states receiving 2 senators regardless of size. Giving the states electors meant the smaller states would be given more influence over the presidential election, while the larger states, being more populous and having more representatives, would get more electoral votes. The smaller states would get a larger percentage of the votes than their population would have had. In this way, the Constitution protected the smaller states from being dominated by the larger ones. So we can see that the founders saw the Electoral College as a way to preserve their vision of a republic while balancing the power issues of their day. Now we will need to determine if this fence is still suitable or if we have outgrown the fence placed by our founders. Today, the issues of big and small states is largely a non-issue. We see things more on a regional or class level. Regions like the Midwest or New England or the Pacific Coast are what we view as national political identity. Politicians will address people from these regions as a group and sometimes view these voting blocks as monolithic. The role of class in politics is still heavily influenced by the region they live in. A working class voter in the Deep South is different than a Midwesterner or someone living along the Pacific coast. While these differences are largely superficial and many of the issues are common throughout the country, the perceived differences and almost rivalries divide the nation into different voting blocks. We also have a different idea of what a republic and democracy should be all about. The founding fathers saw republics as something for the elite to rule over. That is why they only allowed property owning males to vote. Today, we see things differently. We hold to the principles that every citizen, 18 or older, should be given the right to vote, and the principle of one person, one vote. We view all people as equal, or at least that is what we say is the law of the land. Does this mean that the Electoral College is a result of a bygone age that has outlived its purpose? Well, if we hold to the values that I just defined, then yes, it is. If we believe that all people are equal and that one person is one vote, then we cannot see the Electoral College as an institution that holds those values. On the face of it, the Electoral College weighs the votes from less populous states heavier than people from more populous states. This in itself breaks the idea of one person equals one vote. The break of our democratic ideals goes further. If we look at how electors are selected, then we will see another major issue with one person, one vote. In 48 states, if you are part of the minority vote of your state, your vote doesn't count. In the other two states, if you're in the minority of your district, then your vote doesn't count. But it may count for the two senatorial electors if you vote for the statewide winner. All of that is to say that only those who vote for the winning candidate of their state get their voice heard. This is an issue with the winner-take-all electoral college system. There are other issues with the electoral college that are even deeper. While it is unlikely for this to happen, it is possible to win a presidential election by carrying only 12 states. So it is theoretically possible for a candidate to get 51% of the vote in 12 states and 0% of every other state and still win the election. While such a nightmare scenario is practically impossible to really happen, the fact that our system has such a ridiculous way to win is insane. A more real threat, still unlikely, but has been suggested, is for state legislatures to change the way that electors are selected. It is constitutionally legal for state legislatures to simply select the electors themselves. They could bypass the election altogether and just pick the slate that they wanted and ignore the people completely. Is this likely to happen anytime soon? No, I do not believe any state legislature would be this bold anytime soon. However, it is dangerous that such an undemocratic option exists and is perfectly constitutional. So, what is the solution? It is simple. Do away the Electoral College and switch to popular vote. Every other election, from the smallest village election to the election of senators, is now by popular vote. A popular election is the most democratic and protects the ideal of one person, one vote. With our modern voting technology, this would be an easy way to elect presidents. But what will opponents say to this? They may say something like, then the rural vote won't matter. The candidates will only stay on the big coastal cities and not travel to the Midwest. And some may just resist change because change is always hard for some to accept. To the first point of the rural vote not mattering in the popular vote, that is simply wrong and a misunderstanding of how voting in elections work. Currently, the rural vote is weighted heavier than it should be under a fair democratic system. In a popular vote system, a rural vote will be equal to an urban vote. The fear is that there are more people living in cities and therefore it is somehow unfair. This argument misses the basic principles of democracy. Votes should not matter more because they come from one place or another. Everyone should be equal. In a popular voting system, every single vote matters as much as every other single vote. To the second point, candidates often travel in the same areas every cycle. The major cities are hit harder than smaller communities, and under a popular voting system, it is unknown how future candidates may run. Some may stick to the major cities and mostly campaign on the coasts, but some may try to build an identity as being for the small town America and visit smaller cities in more Midwestern states. No one can predict how exactly the change will affect how candidates will campaign. For the third point, some people will always resist change, and that is not a valid argument for or against something. It is clear that the Electoral College is undemocratic and an archaic system. Did it achieve what the founders sought when they created it? Yes, it has functioned for over a century at breaking up power in the states and not letting any one state dominate the others. Is it democratic? No. It subverts the will of the majority vote and has elected presidents who have lost the popular vote. Removing this system and using the popular vote as the way to elect presidents will be the best way forward for the nation. It will make all votes equal and matter. It will build trust in the system because voters will feel their voices heard. The Electoral College will continue to undermine the legitimacy of presidential elections, and we have enough forces trying to do that already. To protect our republic, we need to reform how we elect our presidents.